Yes, the Tascam Mixcast 4 is new, if not a tad late to the party. But the real question here is it better than a Rodecaster Pro? And I think I can answer that. But let's go over the details first in case somebody calls me a shill. Okay? I have the SM58 plugged in and the gain is set to Unity just so you can get an idea of its performance. Now we'll take a look at the gain quality a bit later on in the video. The build quality on this thing, well, it's all plastic, but while a lot of people don't like the Zoom plastic on the P8, this is nothing like that. At first glance, I thought it was an aluminum chassis, and even after I got my hands on it, I was a bit thrown off. It feels fantastic and does not feel cheap in the slightest. The faders and knobs on this thing feel great as well. No issues whatsoever. The pads and the buttons, however, well, I really like the feedback from the sound pads. Very much the same as the Rodecaster Pro, but the other buttons, they're a tad mushy. It's not really a massive complaint, though I do like a bit of click while I'm pushing my buttons. The inputs are fantastic as well, very little play, and feels secure. And on that note, I just have to say, I love the new fad of these power cables being attached with a nut. Nothing that's going to loosen over time or get kicked out at the wrong moment. Very nice feature on all the newer podcasting boards. Now, this is how the two boards match up side by side, just in case size is an issue on your desk. All in all, though, I'm very impressed with the build quality of the Mixcast 4. Now, with that out of the way, let's literally take a walk around the board. Starting off, you have your 4 XLR faders, USB pass-through, followed by the TRRS link for the phones, as well as the Bluetooth connection and the fader for the sound pads. Yes, that means you can actually have a total of 7 voices with this thing, including the 3 channels for guests. Very cool. Now, we're going to come back to that big screen in a few, but let's go to the top left-hand part of the board. Each channel has a mute and a solo button. Not buttons that will be used all the time, but definitely a massive bonus when you need them. And the one huge inclusion is the talkback button. Now, a lot of people don't understand why you might need this, but it can be a huge bonus if you have a separate producer who isn't on the podcast. It gives them the ability to communicate with the hosts without going over the air, so to speak. Then you have the 3 buttons at the top: the mark button, stop button, and record pause. Now, the latter of the two are obvious, but this mark button is awesome, and it can be used to mark part of the audio that you might want to highlight for later, or perhaps a way to mark false starts or obvious edits. Above that, you have the monitoring section. Looking at you, Zoom. This one knob knocks you out of contention for best board: the ability to mute out your monitors. What a concept. And of course, you have the 4 headphone controls. Around the back, you have your 4 XLR ports, a choice of the TRRS or left-right quarter-inch jacks for a line in, which is a nice touch. Left and right monitor out, and the USB port. Headphone jacks over here with an SD card slot, and the power and power button. One thing to note, you can plug in the main headphones here in the back or around the front as well. Kind of a cool little feature. Now let's take a look at the meat and potatoes of the unit, the touchscreen. The first thing I love is when you start up the unit, it's here to remind you of what you need to do. Do not dismiss this screen, please, because it's going to bite you in the arse. Trust me. It's a very simple UI, and honestly a nice change from the mix bag that was the PodTrack P8. Now, let's start out with the main home screen. Here you have all the levels nicely laid out, and personally, I kind of like this main screen over the Rode and the Zoom. That said, when you start to dig into the settings, just by using this button here, things start to set this apart from the competition. Well, kinda. Honestly, when walking through this, I think it's just as robust as the Rode implementation, though maybe not as slick. Now, this first button lets you adjust all the settings for each channel. Yes, this thing has all the trimmings just like the Rodecaster. I do like how the settings have a manual mode as well, just so you can set up your own compression and such without the basic 2-pronged approach. Now, I know the Rode has this as well now, but it didn't at launch, so it's nice to see it here. As for the other processing, we're going to take a look at those when we do the side-by-side with the Rodecaster Pro. The USB, TRRS, and Bluetooth each have their own settings as well, mostly just EQ, depending on what you're running, either voice or music. The playback button is pretty straightforward. I have to say, when it comes to the customization for the sound pads, this thing's awesome. Fully customizable, and unlike the Zoom, once again, the settings aren't spread out over multiple areas of the menus. Now, from there, you have the hardware settings, where, among other things, it allows you to choose pre and post fader listen for the solo buttons. Now, I don't imagine most people are going to be bothering with most of these settings, but it is important to note this is where you turn on the mix minus, a necessary step for phone calls. Getting into the SD settings, pretty straightforward, though here's one of my first complaints about this unit. You will notice in the bottom right of this screen the version of firmware. Now, the only way you can update it is by loading the firmware update on an SD card and inserting it. Kind of weird and far too many steps for most people. This thing connects to a computer via USB. There's absolutely no reason in the world you shouldn't be able to do it through your computer. Please, Tascam, fix that. And yeah, I do have a couple other complaints, which we'll get to in a bit. Don't worry. A quick look at the specs for this thing. It has 8 channels, all of them 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. It has 14x2 connectivity, individually addressable phantom, and it takes storage up to 512 gigs. On top of that, a really cool feature, it does work with Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android, and it does actually come with its own editor, or DAW, which leads us to just that, the included DAW. And this is where the board kind of separates itself from the competition. And I mean, when I say separate, I mean by a lot. Sure, it's just a DAW, but, well, it's also free. And in that spirit, it also blows any other free DAW completely out of the water. Now, I'm not going to get into the basics of the DAW because it's, well, just a DAW. But let's just say it sells the board more than the board itself. It's a stroke of genius, and honestly, it's a better add-on than any other kind of processing you could hope for. Now, just to back that claim up a bit, and I know I'm going to get the questions, the DAW is a multi-track DAW, and it has support for all the bells and whistles, including VST plugins. For the Tascam, pretty simple. The EQ profiles on this are pretty basic. You can go in deep, mid, bright, or you can set manual. And then the manual, you can go in with high shelf and low shelf. Not really necessary with this. I do have a bit of a deeper voice, and I can EQ it in post. If you're not going to be EQing in post, maybe you can choose one, or you can go and set your high and low shelf yourself. I'll just go with deep. As for the compressor, well, let's go in and turn that on. All right, so this is the manual. This is the soft compression. This is the hard compression. And personally, I prefer the manual compression. So that's what we've got so far with the EQ, the compression. And now we're going to get into some of the other processing. We'll turn that on. And I'll turn this noise suppressor off. Now, this is the de-esser. Okay, this is with the de-esser off and de-esser on. Now, this thing is just a threshold and frequency scenario. The threshold is how loud do the S sounds have to be, and the frequency is where the S sounds. So you can actually go through this, and you can find the S sounds at any different frequency. I'll set these around 4100, 4200, and those are the S frequencies we're trying to stomp down a bit. If you crank the threshold, beware, you're going to start to get rid of other sounds as well. Now let's look at the noise suppressor. I do have my air conditioning going on behind me. Let's turn off all of this processing. And with the processing off, let's take a look at the sound of the preamps when we ramp it up, okay? Okay, so here we are on the Rodecaster Pro, and we're going to go through the processing on this one. So we're in channel 2, and we're going to go through, this is the compression. We'll go through the high pass filter, the de-esser, we're going to turn that on, and there you go. And then we're going to put on the noise gate. You also have the oral exciter. This brings up the airiness and the big bottom. I'm not as much of a fan of the oral exciter because it messes with my S's. So we're going to go into the voice, go tone, I'm deep. There we go, deep tone. And voice strength, I have a strong voice. I do. I've got a very, very loud voice. Just ask my wife or my children. There you go. There's with the audio processing on. Then you have the threshold, attack, and release here. All of that. That's how aggressive the noise gate's going to be. There you go. There's with the audio processing on. Then you have the threshold, attack, and release here. All of that. That's how aggressive the noise gate's going to be.
Hello?
Ashley, how's it going? It's your father.
Huh. You don't sound like my father.
Ouch. Hello, Ashley?
Hello? Oh,
Hi,
hey.
just once again calling you from a different. This is now calling you from Facebook. Hopefully, school's going well for you.
Yeah,
Okay, and life is good.
yeah. I have to do laundry now.
Okay, the pros, they're pretty extensive here. This thing does everything the Rodecaster does and a bit more. The included DAW is just flat out genius, and honestly, it's kind of a treat to use. I enjoy the experience as much as the Rodecaster Pro, and well, that's saying a lot. Something that no one else has been able to do yet. The LiveTrack L8 had issues, couldn't overtake the Rodecaster Pro. The P8 was an even lazier approach. This thing is the first to really challenge the supremacy of the Rodecaster Pro. However, that being said, here are the cons. First of all, as we discussed earlier, firmware updates should not be a complicated thing. That is stupid. Second is the routing of the channels in multitrack. For some odd reason, the routing has the first and second channels as a stereo mix of the unit, meaning when you are in multitrack and choosing channels to record in your DAW, input 3 is microphone 1. Why? That's not intuitive at all. And not only that, when choosing the inputs, none of them are labeled. Oh, I had to call Tascam to speak to one of their techs just to figure it out. And 20 minutes later, when we finally did, his response, well, that's stupid. Now, that said, he is putting in a request to have it changed, though he did say that if you want it changed quicker, you got to get more people to complain about. So here I am, Tascam, complaining about it. Things like this are the reason people get put off by a product. Unnecessarily difficult setups on a unit that is supposed to be directed at first timers with audio. It just doesn't work. Change this, Tascam. Once again, I'm going to say it. It's stupid. That said, though, one more notch for the pros for both of these companies, Rode and Tascam. They both have amazing customer service and support. Rarely is that going to be a bonus when you're looking at a piece of equipment, but either one that you choose, you're going to know that you're being well taken care of. Now, I've documented it well with my approach to Rode and how their customer service works. But the tech I spoke with at Tascam didn't even have to call me back, and he told me that on the phone, considering I'm in Canada, not in the US. But he saw the call and he's like, I'll do it anyways. That's the kind of stuff that makes you some very loyal fans. I can guarantee, please, both of you, don't stop. So then it comes down to this. Which one should you buy? Now, let me be very clear. I think you will be happy with either one of these units. The Rodecaster had a bit of a rocky start, but honestly, Rode was literally building this thing out of thin air. Props to them for actually creating a product to fit a need, actually revolutionizing the audio market to target podcasters. Now, Tascam has a much better product to start, though they were able to learn a lot from what Rode did. And honestly, the two of them are neck and neck when choosing between them. The one thing that absolutely tips the scales is the included DAW with the Mixcast 4. It may very well be the one thing that separates it from the Rodecaster Pro, and I mean by a long shot. So if for that reason you're trying to decide between these two beasts, and you don't have a DAW, or maybe you're just using Audacity, go with the Mixcast. Trust me. If you already have a DAW, then these are basically a toss-up. Go for the one that you think best fits the value in your situation. I will have both linked below. And by the way, if you liked this video, maybe you'll like this one as well. Cheers, guys, and I will see you in the next video.